right?
Okay, we're in Eruvin, Hey Dalad.
And hey, dollar, here we go. We may not measure except with a 50 cubit rope, either shorter nor longer. One may not measure except with the rope opposite his heart. If he was measuring and reached a valley or a mound, he should span it and return to his measuring. If he reached a mountain, he should span it and return to his measuring, provided he does not go out of the Zechum. If he is unable to span it regarding this, Rabbi Dosei Bar Yonanan stated in Rabbi Meir's name, I have heard that we will pierce mountains, meaning that they're going to go through the mountain.
So when you say pierce the mountains, basically it means that they go along the slope. The two guys holding the rope, they'll walk up the side of the mountain basically, with the one guy holding it above his head and the other guy holding it low, so that the rope remains level. And that way they can keep measuring it as if it's
different kind of picture. I think my finger's in the way. Can you see it?
That's exactly what I was saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me just close this door from the cats. Okay. Pierce the mountains. Hey, we may not accept measurements except from an expert. If he extended the kum at one point and shortened it at another, the extended kum is followed. If one extended it while another shortened it, the one who extended it, it is followed. Even a male slave, even a female slave, is believed to say, until here is the Sabbath Techum, for the sages not state this law to be stringent, but rather to be lenient.
Right, because the whole din of the Techum is a din d'oraisa, but the actual Techum d'oraisa is at 10,000 amas. Chazal shortened it to 2,000 amas as a geder, as a gezereth, right? Just to make sure that you don't go further than that. So the whole din of Techum as we observe it is d'Rabbanan. Therefore, the Chazal have the ability to be makel and say, listen, if you've got a doubt, you can go for the larger one. It's fine, and you'll be okay.
Right, you'll be okay. All right. That was
Hey.
Vav. Okay.
Yeah, now Vav.
If a town of an individual became public property, we may make an error for its entirety. But if a public town became an individual's, we may not make an error for its entirety unless we exclude an area from it equivalent to the town of Kadasha in Judea. 50 these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says 3 courtyards containing 2 dwellings.
Okay, so the public and the private town, it's actually this is where there's some interesting discussion over here, and this is where the private town, according to Rashi reads this as a small town where there are less than 600,000 people. That's a small town. Is less than 600,000 people having access to the Rishus Harabim, or to the street. Let's not call it a Rishus Harabim because that's prejudging it. If it's got, according to Rashi's Shita, and Rashi is the one who comes up with the 600,000 number because he says we've got the Midbar. That's and even though there were actually much more people in the camps in the Midbar, but we don't know exactly how many people there were in the camp because the Torah never states it explicitly. But what we do know is the number of people of army-going age, which is the 600,000. A number of men of army-going age. So that is. So that's the number that he uses for it, and says that so according to one shita, people who got access to the street, or another shita, people who actually use the street, making it into Rishus Harabim, and that is the basis on which we have our the Erev, the Shituf Mavos, which to be more technically correct, that goes around all of our cities in Israel, because Beit Shemesh is 120,000 people or so. So that's nowhere near the minimum. Therefore, you're allowed to enclose the entire city. But if you have a larger city than that, where you've got more than 600,000 people with access to the streets, then in order to make it to make a sheet of mavos, you've got to leave a certain section out, because it's got to be clear to the observers that this is a subsection of the city, that we're only cordoning off, we're only making a shituf in a certain area, because otherwise you're gonna forget that there's even a din of not carrying an Rishus Harabim. And I actually asked Rav Haber last night, like, how does it work that you've got an Eruv in a place like New York? Because you've got way more people than that there. And like, how, if that's not a Rishus Harabim Midoraisa, then what is? So the Rav said, look, it actually is a very controversial thing that that Rav Moshe Feinstein was dead against having an Eruv in Manhattan.
Right.
And so it is quite a controversial thing. But he said the way they did it in Brooklyn was that they had two separate Eruvin. You've got Ocean Parkway going down the middle, and you've got I think Flatbush and Borough Park. Is that right? Have I got my geography right?
Right.
On either side, and each one's got an independent Eruv. So it's kind of split in two, and that makes it more of a sort of that you haven't included the main Rishus Harabim. So whatever the case, that was just an interesting little diversion that I wanted to share with you from my discussion with Rav Haber last night.
There aren't many cities in Israel that have 600,000 people, are there? I mean, Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim.
The greater Tel Aviv area does, but I mean, like the greater Tel Aviv area.
Right, Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim.
And Yerushalayim, there's a good chance. I actually don't know. I would have to look it up on Wikipedia how many people are actually living in Yerushalayim, because can you include East Jerusalem in it, and all of the outlying areas like Ramot.
They only walk there every single day. There are shittas like that also.
Right. So my son-in-law is just pointing out that there's some shittas that you actually have to have 600,000 people using the area, not just passing through. So that's one of the shittas I mentioned earlier. There's another one. There's another shitta that just says that have access to it. Okay. So let's move on to new Mishnahs. Zion. Mishaya b'mizrach v'amar libno arev li b'marav. B'marav v'amar libno arev li b'mizrach. Okay, well, I mean, the directions, basically the reversal of direction just shows that we're not stuck on east or west dafka. It's just what happened was, in this case, is that earlier in the day he told his son, do me a favor, please make me an Erev in the west. And comes Erev Shabbos, and he finds himself somewhere in the east, and he wasn't able to get there in time. Now, the situation is im yesh hemenu uleveso alpaim amos. If he's got less than 2,000 amos between himself and his house, ule'erevo yosemikan, but there's more than 2,000 amos between where he is now at Shkia, at Bein Hashmashos, and where his son put down the erev that he asked him to do. Okay. Mutar lebeso v'asula erevo. Then his erev is invalid, because the erev that was put down for him is more than 2,000 amos for him. It can't do anything. Once the erev itself is ineffective, then the Mishnah tells us that it's okay. His house is still a valid erev in the city, and the whole city that he's in, he's still considered like one of the townspeople. Now, you might have had a thought that since he had intention to set up his erev further away and now it didn't work, now he's stuck in his daled amos. No. Which, fortunately for him, he's not, because Stam Das is that he wanted to be in his house, if not in his erev, so he's all right there. However, if he is within 2,000 amos of his erev, and it's honestly not necessary to mention that his house is more than this, because even if his house is less than this, his erev is still going to be affected, because that's what he told his son to do, and that was his das. So his das was really fulfilled. The commentary says just that they mentioned that he's further from his than 2,000 amos from his original house, just in order to keep the concord of language between the beginning of the Mishnah and the end. Okay. So then Asur lebeso mutila erevo. In other words, his erev is where it is effective, and therefore he's allowed the 2,000 amos in all around where his erev was placed, and his house doesn't enter into the picture. Nosin is erevo be'iburo shal ir. Now remember the ibur of the city. That's the area where you square off. So if the city is an odd shape, and you draw a boundary around it, so the ibur is the part where there's no city, but it's still inside the rectangle. Okay, lo asa v'lo klum. He didn't do anything. He has achieved nothing, because in any case, the ibur shel ir is considered part of the city. So whether he's on this corner of the city or that corner of the city, he's still in the city. So his eruv was completely ineffective. If however you put it out now, this is an interesting choice of lashon, because it really doesn't mean l'chutz l'tchum. Because if you put your eruv outside the tchum of the city, the actual tchum, then it's also going to be ineffective because it's too far for you. Okay, it's got to be between the boundary of the city and the edge of the tchum in order to be effective. So it only works if his boundary, if his eruv is inside that border section before the tchum. Afilu ama achas, even just one ama outside of the city boundary, masheniskar hu mafsid. Whatever he has gained in that direction, let's say it's going to the west. So however many amas he goes to the west, he loses those amas in the east because his eruv moves along with him. And as a matter of fact, he'll typically lose more, because if he's in a city that's more than 2,000 amas, if you're inside the city, and that's one of the interesting things, as we'll see, is that the city itself is considered like Dalet amas. So if you're in Beit Shemesh, you can walk all the way through Beit Shemesh. If you're in New York City, you can walk the entire length and breadth of New York City in a Shabbos, and you haven't gone outside the Tchum, because it's all considered like one Dalet amas. And you only start measuring the 2,000 amas once you reach the city limits. Okay, but if you make an eruv outside, then you lose. Then as we'll see, even if the eruv, the 2,000 amas goes right in the middle of the city, then that's as far as you can go. Okay. Mishna ches anshe ir gedola mahalchin is kol ir katana, ve'ein anshe ir katana mahalchin is kol ir gedola. So if you have two neighboring cities which are further than 141 and whatever amas apart, so they don't form a single tchum, but the tchum of the large city encompasses the small city. So, for example, let's say you've got two cities that are 500 amas apart. Okay.
Right, I'm looking at this picture here.
And the width of the small city, you've got the diagram over there, right? So the width of the small city, that by the way, I was looking at the article last night actually when I was preparing. That diagram is not to scale. So don't get hung up on the size of it. I noticed that the diagram is not to scale, so don't pay too much attention to that. But what's the important thing is that the 2,000 amas of the large city totally encompasses the smaller city. Okay, so once the smaller city is encompassed inside the tchum, so let's say they're 500 apart, and the small city is 1,000 wide. Okay, so then I've got 1,500. So now that 1,500 is all inside the 2,000 amas. Now what you can do is you actually compress those 1,000 amas of the small city into 4 amas, because it's treated as if it's 4 amas. So you've got 500 before it, 4 over there, and then you have 1,496 amas that you can extend beyond the small city. For the inhabitants of the larger city, they can go beyond the smaller city, 1,496 amas. Okay. However, the smaller city doesn't have that option because their 2,000 amas ends in the middle of the larger city, so they can only go up into the larger city as far as the 2,000 amas allows. Ketzad. Now, this ketzad is not actually an explanation of the previous point, but it's giving a case study in the two cities. Mishna be'ir gedola v'nasan es ereva be'ir katana v'nasan es ereva be'ir gedola. So in either case, whether you're in the large city and putting your eruv in the small city or vice versa, then you can traverse the entire city that you put your eruv in, and outside of it 2,000 amas. So what that's just saying is that when you put your eruv inside another city, it's as if you're a resident of that city, and you get the entire area of that city plus 2,000 amas around it. Rabbi Akiva omer ein lo ela makom eruv alpaim amah. So Rabbi Akiva has a shita that is different from the Chachamim, which is that when you put down an eruv, as opposed to being inside a city, when you put down eruv food somewhere, He says you do not get the benefit of being at one of the city people. You don't get to walk through the whole city. You don't get to treat the whole city as if it's Dalit Amas. You just take the 2,000 amas around where your area of food is. Okay, now the next Mishnah takes dives a little more into this discussion. Amar lehem Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva comes and argues the point. Yatem modimli, the nosen erev of Amara. If somebody takes his area of food and puts it inside a cave, she'ein lo mimakom erevo el alpayim ama. So if he puts it inside the cave, all he doesn't get the entire area of the cave plus 2,000 amas. He just gets 2,000 amas from wherever he put his food down. Okay. Amrulo emasai. They said, yeah, you're right, but only in the following case, bisman she'ein badiurin. That's when the cave itself is uninhabited, right? So even though there's a big space in it, but nobody lives there, so it's not considered a town, and therefore it's not considered one big dwelling, and you can't get and you can't use that to add to the area boundaries. Aval yesh badiurin, if there were taka people living in there, or even the commentary says, or even if it's a place that's actually that's fitting for people to live in. In other words, that the walls aren't collapsed or anything like that. That it's a useful place for people to live in. And then Taka, yes, you do get to use the area of the cave, the interior of the cave as your city kilu, and then 2,000 amas from the boundaries of the cave. Therefore, it turns out that the interior of the cave is more lenient than the top of the cave. So because if somebody put their area of food on the ground above the cave, then there's nowhere to live there, and then you just get the 2,000 amas around where the food is. But if you put it inside the cave, then you'd draw a line up to the top of the cave around the boundaries of where the habitable area is of the cave, and then around that you draw 2,000 amas, which makes it a little bit bigger. But however, that's only from the origin point of the Eruv. But for the 2,000 amas that extends beyond it, wherever that line ends, that's where it ends. And even if it's in the middle of a city, and you can't go further than the 2,000 amas, you can't say, oh, it's inside the city, let's extend to the end of the city. You can't do that. It ends wherever it ends inside the city.
So they measure from inside the cave out, or from outside in?
Right. So let's say somebody had put their area of food inside the cave, and the cave was a dwelling place, or it was suitable for a dwelling place. Then you take the entire boundaries of the cave and use that as the basis for your area. Then you draw the square around it. Then you draw 2,000 amas around that. But now, if the 2,000 amas in one of the directions overlapped onto a city, it doesn't help. You still only get the 2,000 amas, and it draws up to exactly where it is inside the city and no further. Okay. Then let's go back to Gimel Gimel.
If he placed it on a tree higher than 10 fists, his erev is not valid. Below 10 fists, his erev is valid. If he placed it in a ditch, even 100 cubits deep, his erev is valid. If he put it atop a reed or atop a pole, so long as it is uprooted and is stuck into the ground, even if it is 100 cubits high, his erev is valid. If he placed it in a locker and lost the key, the erev is valid. If Eliezer says, if he does not know that the key is in its place, the erev is not valid.
Right, so the principle here being that the area of food has to be technically accessible to him. Meaning, if it's placed in a tree, it's muktzah, because you're not allowed to climb the tree, you're not allowed to use it. So he can't. So then his area is going to be invalid. But if he plants it somewhere that's difficult to get to, even if it's inside a locked cupboard, you could break down the cupboard. And that would be legit. You'd be allowed to do that. So therefore, his erev is valid.
If it rolled beyond the tachum, or a heap fell on it, or it burned, or it was a truma which became contaminated, if it was still day, the erev is invalid. If after dark, the erev is valid. If it is in doubt, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda say it is caught in between. Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon say a doubtful erev is valid. Said Reb Yossi, Abtumlis attested to the name of 5 sages that a doubtful valid is valid.
And that is the halacha that the doubtful Erev is actually valid, as not like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda who say that you're now Chamar Gamal and the Safek reduces your area that you can walk.
And the halakha follows Reb Yossi in that.
Yeah, that's right. So we follow like Rabbi Yossi.
A person may attach a condition to his Erev and say, if Gentiles come from the east, my Erev is to the west. If they come from the west, my Erev is to the east. If they come from both directions, I shall go to the place I choose. If they do not come from either direction, I am as my town people. If a scholar comes from the east, my Erev is to the east. From the west, my Erev is to the west. If one comes to here and one comes to there, I shall go to the place I choose. If to neither direction, I am as my town people. Now, Yehuda says, if one of the scholars was his teacher, he must go to his teacher. But if both were his teachers, he may go to the place he chooses. Okay. Continue.
Shabbos.
That's it.
Shabbos Yud Aleph Daled.
Okay. One who throws a distance of 4 cubits in the sea is exempt. If there was a shallow pool of muddy water with a public domain passing through it, one who throws a distance of 4 cubits in it is liable. How much is the shallow pool? Less than 10 tefachim. A shallow pool with a public domain passing through it, one who throws a distance of 4 cubits in it is liable. One who throws from the sea to the dry land, from the dry land to the sea, from the sea to the ship, from the ship to the sea, from one ship to another is exempt. If ships are tied together, we may move things from one to the other. If they are not tied together, even though they are close to each other, we may not move things from one to the other. One who threw something and reminded himself after it had been left in his hand, if another person caught it, or a dog caught it, or it was burned in flight, he is exempt. If one threw a stone with the intention of inflicting a wound upon either a man or a beast, and he reminded himself when the wound was not yet been inflicted, he is exempt. This is the rule. All who are liable for sin offerings are not liable unless the beginning and end of their acts are both inadvertent. If the beginning was inadvertent, but their end was intentional, for if their beginning was intentional, but their end was inadvertent, they are exempt unless the beginning and their end are inadvertent.
Give me a second.
We have nice.
Okay, we're in Mastros Aleph Zayin.
Wine, after it has been skimmed, though it has been skimmed, he may collect from the upper wine press and from the duct and drink. Oil, when it descends into the trough, though it has descended, he may take from the press basket and from between the pressing stone and the pressing boards and put it on a cake or a dish, but may not put it in a pot or a saucepan while they are boiling. Rabbi Yehuda says he may put into it anything, he may put it into anything except for what contains vinegar or brine. A cake of figs, when he has smoothed it down, one may smooth down with figs or grapes of tevel, but Yehuda forbids. If he smooth down with grapes, it is not rendered susceptible to uncleanliness, and Yehuda says it is rendered susceptible. Dried figs, when they are stamped down in a store bin, when they are pressed together, if one was stamping down a jar or pressing together in a store bin, and the jar broke and the store bin opened, he may not eat from them a chance meal. But Yossi permits this. If one was passing through the street and said, take yourselves some figs, they may eat and are exempt. Therefore, if they brought them into their houses, they tithe them as definite, and take and bring them into your houses. They may not eat of them a chance meal. Therefore, if they took them into their houses, they tithe only those, only as the mai.
Okay. Mikvahs Ches Gimel.
Okay. If one discharged thick drops from a member, he is tummy. These are the words of Reb Elazar Chisma. If one had bad thoughts at night and arose and found his flesh warm, he is tummy. A woman who was semen on the third day is tahor. These are the words of Reb Elazar ben Azariah. Reb Yismael says sometimes it is 4 periods, sometimes 5, and sometimes 6. Reb Akiva says it is always 5. If a Gentile woman emitted the semen of a Jew, it is tameh. If a Jewish daughter emitted the semen of a Gentile, it is tahor. If a woman had intercourse and she went down and immersed herself but had not cleaned out her house, it is as if she did not immerse herself. Valkyrie, who immersed himself and did not pass water, becomes tummy when he does pass water. Nabusi says in the case of a sick man or an old man, he becomes tummy, but in the case of a young and healthy person, he's tahor. If Anita put money into her mouth and she went down and immersed herself, she is purified of her tumah, but she's still tummy on account of her saliva. If she put her hair in her mouth, or she clenched her hand, or she pressed her lips together, is it as if she did not immerse herself? If one holds a person or two utensils or immerses them and they remain tummy, they remain tummy. But if he rinsed his hands in water, they become tahor. And Reb Shimon says he may loosen his hole so that the water should enter in between. Concealed areas and folded areas do not require that the water should enter into them. Okay.
Okay. Chulin, Zain Gimel, Gira Nashe.
Hear that little baby? Okay. All right.
Oh, you can hear my grandson there.
Yes. Uh, if one eats an olive's volume of the sinew of a thigh, he incurs 40 lashes. If he ate it and it does not contain an olive's volume, he is also liable. If he ate an olive's volume of this one and an olive's volume of that one, he incurs 80 lashes. And Rabbi Yehuda says he incurs only 40. A thigh in which the sinew of the thigh was cooked, if it contains the amount that can receive a flavor, is prohibited. How do we evaluate it? Like meat and turnips. Why like meat and turnips? Okay. If the sinew of the thigh was cooked with other sinews, then he recognizes it. It prohibits only if it imparts a flavor. If not, all are prohibited. But the broth is prohibited only if a flavor was imparted to it. Similarly, a piece of nevela and similarly a piece of non-kosher fish that was cooked with other pieces, when he recognizes them, they prohibit only if they impart a flavor. If not, they are all prohibited. But the broth is prohibited only if a flavor was imparted to it. That's it.
And Sota, Gimel Dalid,
Okay. Gimel.
Dalid actually.
I'm
Gimel
sorry?
Dalid.
Gimel Dalit?
Gimel Dalid, yeah.
Ah, I pushed it in the wrong place. She hardly finishes drinking before her face becomes sallow. Her eyes bulge and her veins protrude. And they call out, take her out, so that she will not contaminate the temple courtyard with tumah. If she had any merit, it held her punishment in abeyance. Certain merits hold punishment in abeyance for 1 year. Other holds it in abeyance for 2 years. Other holds it for abeyance for 3 years. Based on this, Ben Azai said a man should teach his daughter Torah, so that if she ever drinks, she will realize that merit can hold her punishment in abeyance. If Eliezer says whoever teaches his daughter Torah is as though he teaches her sensuality. Rabbi Yeshua says a woman prefers one measure with sensuality than 9 measures with chastity. He used to say, a foolish saint, a cunning evildoer, an abstinent woman, and the wounds of the pious, these are the ruin of the world. Reb Shimon says merit does not hold the punishment of the bitter waters in abeyance, but if you say that merit does hold the punishment of the curse-causing waters in abeyance, you diminish the aura of the waters in the minds of all the women who must drink. And you defame all the undefiled women who have drunk, because it will be said that they were defiled, but merit held the punishment in abeyance. Rebbe says Maya holds the punishment of the curse-causing waters in abeyance, but she does not bear children or continue to thrive, though wasted away by degrees, and in the end she dies that death. If a mincha offering became tummy before it was sanctified in a service vessel, it is like all of the mincha offerings, and it may be redeemed, but if it has not a service vessel, it is like all of the mincha offerings, and it must be burned. These are the ones whose mincha offerings must be burned. One who says, I am defiled to you, or about whom witnesses testify that she is defiled, or one who says, I will not drink, or whose husband does not want to give her to drink, or whose husband contaminated with her on the way. The mincha offerings of all who are married to Kahana must be burned.
So just like they take on the din of the kohanim, just like normally a mincha offering is you only put the komets on the mizbeach and the kohanim eat the rest.
Right.
But for the wife of a kohen, she takes on the din of a kohen. That the entire thing gets burned on the mizbeach, so just like the mincha of any other kohen. Okay.
Thank
We're
you.
done.
Have a
Oh,
great
tomorrow,
day.
no share tomorrow. I've got a work event which I need to get to early. So
Okay.
we'll
All right.
so we'll resume Mitzvah Hashem on Friday.
Friday. Terrific. Have a great
Okay.
day. Thank you. Bye.
See you then. Bye.
See you then. Bye.